All right, let's dive into this story, unless somebody has something interesting to say as I get going here. All right, as Jeff, again, I use the name Jeff. There's a joke among my friends that I use the name Jeff too much, so every once in a while I throw it in on purpose. I was doing a short story collection a few years ago, and I started finding that almost every other story had a Jeff in it, so I had to cut it down to just one Jeff. And this is actually one of the characters from one of those stories that remained Jeff, and that was the only Jeff in that entire collection. So every once in a while I use the name Jeff again. I don't want it to go away completely. I'll probably have to change it when I start putting these in collections or whatever. So as Jeff pulled himself from his shallow grave, you know you're already starting off badly if you're digging yourself out of a grave. Again, I want to emphasize that this has happened before. Put a comma there. The first thought to pass through his rotten head. Alright, so we're emphasizing he's not a ghost, he's some sort of creature, maybe a zombie. Was that things had really changed since the butcher died. Now we're capitalizing that so it's some kind of title. Alright, the other dead children. Alright, so if you need some sort of disclaimer that this story might get gross and there may be some trigger warnings in here, let this serve as the warning. The other dead children crawled out. I have names on this posted note here, so I'm trying to make sure I get everybody in there I need in there. First mistake of burying bodies, shallow grave. Well, you just sometimes you're dealing with people that aren't very responsible, you know what I'm saying? So we kind of romanticize killers in TV shows where they seem to be these masterminds and have a good work ethic and all that kind of stuff, but some of them are just lazy, shallow grave digging, no good ne'er-do-wells, believe it or not. I don't know any personally. Everybody has a master plan for how they would get away with burying a body, but it's very time consuming, I would assume. The other dead children crawled out of the soil all around him. Do I put their names in here or do I do something else? Armand says, I tossed them out the back door. The Canadian geese will eat them. Well, you got wild boars down there too, don't you? And neighbors of varying reputations. I mean, there's no telling what could happen. And does anybody, I mean, you live in Florida, does anybody even really check to see what's going on with the bodies there and there? All right. Alright, the other dead children crawled out of the soil all around him. No, let's change that. From their unmarked graves all around him. Alright, there's a lot in that paragraph. We've introduced a character, we've introduced that there's a shallow grave, we've introduced that they're unmarked, something happened with a dude named the Butcher, and there's a lot of dead children. So I think we've given a lot of detail about this, including that the story is going to be in some way supernatural and probably bad things are going to happen. Jeff used one of his fingers that still had skin over it. Again, I apologize if this is getting too gross. You may want to bail out now. Jeff used one of his fingers that still had skin over it to unclog his ears. At least there were no worms burrowing around in there this evening. fish tongue to force the grit out from between his remaining teeth as he approached the house. Most of the windows had been broken. Not all of them from him and his friends. Were they really his friends? They were his only company. First time chat, great imagery. Oh, thank you, Rich. I appreciate that. They were they really his friends? They were his only companions for untold years now. Everyone being killed by the same deranged man. Everyone being killed by the same deranged man gave them a bond, but it wasn't exactly the building blocks of true friendship. He missed his friends from when he was alive. He missed his mother and the rest of his family too, wherever they were now. The porch steps had broken through. It could have been vandalism, but it looked like old-fashioned rot to him. Jeff had died young, and there was much he didn't know. But he understood rot on a personal level. He took a moment to scratch at his exposed rib bones through the open wound of his belly. Are you going back in, Jeffrey? Okay, that is not how I want to spell that. How about that? That looks good. All right. Are you going back in, Jeffrey? You know he ain't in there. Jeff turned about, listening to his brittle, not griddle, his brittle bones, no, joints, his brittle joints pop, and the bones grinding together. Tyler was missing most of his nose, and the rest of his face was drawn and long in a way that reminded him of a horse. Of course, we rhymed there. Of course, he wasn't too keen on seeing how his own face looked. Dylan and Stanley looked even worse than Tyler as they helped the younger kids get up out of the ground too. There wasn't much muscle left on them at this point, and Jeff thought more and more that there was no point to these nightly adventures. He thought a lot about the butcher, even after all this time. He really thought about him more than his poor mother. They had haunted the butcher for all the years he had gone without getting caught. Jeff supposed you couldn't really say that he got away with it. He never went to prison, but the undead children had punished him and made him sorry all the rest of his life. Let's say once he was gone, they looked for him for a long time because they didn't quite feel done with him, even in death. But the old man had decided probably wisely to haunt other places. Tyler chewed on something and then spit out the pieces of what had to be more than one bug. Are you ready? What's the plan tonight? Jeff asked. Raise hell, Tyler said. The routine was getting old, but at least Tyler came up with new things to say many nights. Raise Hell was an old favorite. Take Over the World was another classic. Tyler also rotated through Get Laid. Hold on. Find Something to Eat. Scare Some Old Women. See what trouble we can find. And find a party to crash. He even made Jeff laugh from, say, on rare occasions, when he came up with something surprising. But there was nothing surprising or funny tonight. They just started walking. Jeff and Tyler led the way. The other kids trailed behind. Dylan and Stanley were close enough to the front of the crowd for Jeff to hear them talking about which comic books they used to own. How could they still give a care about something like that? He supposed they had to talk about something, or it was all just shambling silence through the dark streets. Okay. There wasn't much left of the town. Lots, okay, let's say many houses and businesses were in slightly better shape than the butcher's old house, but only slightly better. Let's say Next page. Thank you. Think I should come up with a story called Next Page? All right. Other corpses shifted and lumbered through the streets. They hunted, let's say, around and inside the darkened structures that they likely had searched 100 times before, doing the same thing over and over struck Jeff as crazy. Many of them had dark holes where their eyes should have been. So maybe that was the best they could do. Alright. Let's say, well, let's not do that. I don't need random symbols in there. Stories are random enough without me throwing typo symbols in there. Alright. Jeff wondered how long he and his undead buddies from the butcher's backyard. Jeff wondered how long he and his undead buddies from the butcher's backyard would still have their eyes. They had been dead a while. Each had been killed at different times over a wide span of years. Jeff knew he and Tyler had watched entirely different cartoons and worshipped different sport and rock and roll heroes. Had they lived, they'd have probably... Get Jay to tell a fun fact. Alright, Tom, we'll do that in just a moment. Had they lived, they'd have probably never met or been friends. Were they friends, though? Either way, he thought they should be far more decomposed than they were, especially judging by the ones that had dug their ways out of proper cemeteries around town. Right. Alright, fun fact. This one will actually be from today. 3 days a week, first thing in the morning, I go to cardiac rehab. Because, again, I had a heart attack back on the 12th of January. I have to put on a heart monitor and go exercise. And they typically want me to do about 45 minutes of exercise, usually on about 3 different machines. And when you first get in there, they kind of direct you where to go, and then they sort of just let you do whatever machines you want to do, which seems like an odd thing at the time because I came in. I'm experiencing a little bit of depression from. They think it's chemical from the heart attack and all that, which apparently happens pretty often. But basically, I go in there and I don't really want to do anything. So it's not like, oh, today I really want to get on this machine, and then this one. But you develop patterns, and so eventually I'm picking my machines anyway. They If my heart rate gets too high, which is a certain percentage past where my starting heart rate is, it's not that I'm in any danger, but they make me either slow down or stop on whatever I'm doing, so that my heart rate stays within a certain range that they want while I'm doing the exercise. So I kind of dance around with that idea where I'm getting on machines, and so I kind of see them walking towards me, so I start slowing down a little bit and that kind of thing. They also have to take my blood pressure regularly, so while I'm pedaling or whatever I'm doing on a machine, though, I'll have to stick out my arm and let them do the blood pressure on it to make sure it's fine, and I'm doing okay, so all that's fine. But I did figure out that there are certain machines that they can't take your blood pressure on, either because your arms are too much in motion, or because if they kind of start messing with you, you might fall off or whatever. So one of those machines is the stair stepper. So there's this big stair step machine that you can get on, and it would seem like that's not a big deal, especially if it's on a low setting. You're just basically walking slowly upstairs because it is very slow, and I can't get up into the higher numbers anyway because then my heart rate goes up too much. But that one actually takes a lot of energy. Even on the slow setting, after about 15 minutes, I've done maybe like 20 floors or something. So that's one where they won't take your blood pressure. And then the elliptical, where you're moving your feet and your hands, you're kind of up high, and they won't take your blood pressure on that. And then the rowing machine. So I started picking those machines because they wouldn't like interrupt me and try to take my blood pressure. But they figured out I was doing that, so they would run and catch me as I was moving between machines and stuff. So they got my blood pressure today. But those are the ones that tend to be a little more strenuous, and I'm kind of in a bad mood when I'm there anyway, so sometimes doing the machines that are a little more strenuous help out some. But I have to pace myself because I can't let my heart rate get up so high that they make me stop the machine or get off the machine or that kind of thing. So that's sort of the passive aggressive games that I'm playing at Cardiac Rehab. They're all very nice people, and I'm polite to everyone and all that kind of stuff, but I guess you got to do something to pass the time, right? Even after my regular treatment is over, I'm allowed to pay a small amount of money to continue to work out there monthly. So it's almost like a private gym with medical staff there or whatever. So I'm probably going to do that because I do think it's helping me get healthier. If I could stop eating as much from being depressed and stuff, that would help a lot too. The high heart rate, are they worried about it throwing a clot or going into VFib? I don't think they think it's going to be that bad. But the issue is, and they did say that over time, if they find that I'm consistently getting up to that level and nothing bad is happening to me, that they'll extend it out. And also at a certain point, I won't be on the heart monitor, so they won't know what I'm doing. Although then they'll come around and check heart rate periodically. The idea is, like, everybody in there is recovering from something. Either they had a bypass, or not everyone's had a heart attack. Sometimes they just had heart surgery because they were smart enough to catch it before the heart attack, unlike I did. And then they also have pulmonary patients, or the people that have trouble with their lungs or whatever on some different days. So the idea is just not overstressing, because most of us there have a lower ejection fraction, which is the amount of blood that your heart pumps out with each pump. And normal people are supposed to be from, say, 50, 55 to 65 in that range. I'm right now I'm about 45, and they're pretty confident that I'll get my ejection rate back up to normal but that's not guaranteed. There's people there that have much lower ejection rates than I do, so being compared to other people who've had heart attacks, I'm in pretty good shape, even though mine was pretty severe. But their issue is just like you're building back the function of your heart slowly, so they don't want people pushing. And then especially with men, apparently, guys get in there and start like pushing too hard, trying to challenge themselves too much, that kind of stuff. Not that they're competitive with each other, but guys tend to try to challenge themselves, compete with themselves, that kind of thing, and so they end up pushing too hard, and you can set yourself back. So like if you had some sort of, maybe not something as severe as a cardiac episode, but something where like you pushed yourself so hard your heart's trying to pump at a level that's above where it's capable at the moment, then you stand up too fast and you fall down and hit your head or something like that. That's more along the lines. Also, like they don't want your blood pressure going up too much and then having a problem. Or actually the reverse is pretty big too. Most of the time when people exercise real hard, apparently their blood pressure goes down, and then they don't want you blacking out or that kind of thing. So it's almost secondary stuff. I mean, you could potentially work out hard enough to where you actually hurt yourself in terms of your heart or whatever, but it's more likely that you'd have a blackout episode, and then they gotta go through all these protocols to make sure you're okay, and then you end up having to start over from a lower level and that kind of thing. So most of it is just not wanting to hinder your progress by having you have to go through a procedure of slowing down so you're not passing out or that kind of thing. I don't think I'm at risk at that. Aside from my kidneys, my heart, and my brain, I seem to be doing fine, and I'm not getting dizzy when I stand up. My blood pressure is pretty consistent for the first time in a long time. So apparently that clot that almost killed me was driving up my blood pressure and all that kind of stuff. But in terms of recovery, I have some pretty good endurance. And again, I was running in the past, and I was having endurance issues. So I'd been running to help keep weight off for a long time. I kind of dropped off around the pandemic, and I tried to start back up a few times in the midst of the pandemic, and I never had the endurance. Like I couldn't keep it up. I couldn't just keep moving, even at a slow pace. I was gassing out, and now I'm starting to think that some of that may have had to do with the clot building. So like what ended up causing my heart attack here recently, I think that may have been a bigger issue. I think it may have been a big issue with my blood pressure, having trouble keeping it controlled. I think it may have been a reason why I was having endurance trouble. So I may have had low heart function for a while, because now that kind of, there's nothing blocking my heart, even though I have a lower than normal ejection rate still as my heart's healing. I feel like I have more endurance. Like I don't, I said, when I would run, I felt like I was going to die, and not literally in the sense of, the way I almost died from a heart attack, but just that sense of like, I have no energy. I can't catch my breath, all that kind of stuff. It feels like a lot of that's out of the way, so that in a lot of senses, physically, in terms of exercise and exertion, I feel a lot better. So I'm having to be cautious in terms of getting back. I've actually started running again, but right now I'm only doing it 2 days a week, and I'm only doing it for 5 minutes. Just a 5-minute run, not headlong, hell to leather or anything like that, but a slow, steady pace of 5 minutes, and then eventually I'll build more minutes on, and then start building miles on. But again, all that stuff apparently seemed to be related. But anyway, that's one of my games at Cardiac Rehab, is trying to get on the machines where they're not allowed to take my blood pressure because I'm moving too much, or the ones that kind of give me a little bit more of a workout. And you got to do something to stay awake at that hour. That's really early in the morning. But I mean, all things considered, it's going pretty well, I think. I had to get the heart cath where they go into your artery and take pictures of the heart, and you get that space age wrist bracelet afterwards. That wasn't fun. Yeah, I got a scar from from my heart cath. Yeah, they went in trying to figure out what was wrong because they could tell there was a blood flow issue, and then they found that that LAD artery, the one that'll kill you, was 100% blocked. So they had to put 2 stents in to fix that. But yeah, I had that thing too. It's almost like a little, almost half plastic box, and it's vacuum sealed over your where the wound is on your wrist or whatever, and then they slowly let the air out, and then finally put a bandage over it or whatever. And then I had to go through that whole period where I'm not allowed to like lift things or do that kind of stuff. So like my heart instructions were start walking around and start exerting yourself, and then my wrist instructions were don't touch anything, don't do anything, that kind of stuff. Yeah, but they found something serious in mine. Of course, I'd already had the heart attack, so they knew something was wrong at that point. Alright, especially judging by the ones that had dug their ways out of the proper cemeteries around town. Tyler asked, you want to swing by the house? Alright. What house? Your house, Tyler said. Why would I want that? There's no one there. I know. Maybe for old time's sake. Why don't we go by your house instead? My whole neighborhood got knocked down years ago, and they put up 100 houses that all look the same. Alright, you wrote Tyler a few lines up, but the problem didn't mark it. Oh, okay. Yep, I sure did. I find a lot of that stuff when I go back through to edit. I'm a rough speller. It's worse on stream too, because of course you're focused on getting the story done, but I usually catch most of those things. That's a shame, Tyler. Does it make you sad? Bite me, Tyler said. Jeff laughed. Looked like there was something funny tonight after all. We're only supposed to bite the living, right? Dylan stepped up just behind and between them. Jeff could hear something crackling each time Dylan took a step. As the boy asked, "Do you think we're really zombies? Like the ones in the movies?" never saw those movies, Tyler said. Jeff shrugged and felt the dry skin on his back tear just a little. He needed to be careful if he wanted to avoid coming apart at the seams. I don't know. Some of them sure are. Some of them sure act like it. As if on cue, an old woman in a mud smeared dress walked out of the boneyard next to an old abandoned church, dragging one broken ankle behind her. She groaned and moaned as she passed diagonally through the street in front of the column of dead boys. I think some of them had their brains removed, Tyler said. What? Stanley asked from further back. How could they still move around with no brains? Tyler glared over his shoulder, and Stanley shrank away a bit. Jeff thought it was probably the missing nose that made Tyler so foreboding. That's probably not the word I want to use, but I'm going to leave it in there for now. And I'll probably spell it correctly. Let's see. He had a sharp tongue and certainly a mean streak too. Tyler turned forward before he said, "Did you really just say that? Every dead person crawls out of the ground every night now, and you think the parts they take out at the autopsy would keep them down?" naked man who had decayed so much above his legs as if to be modest again, wavered past them in the next lane, going the other way. From the neck up, cracked. Okay, let's see. I need to put a comma there. From the neck up, cracked makeup and a waxy film seemed to preserve the dead man's features and hairdo. Jeff thought that might be from the funeral home. The guy didn't look well above or below the neck, really, but being dead would do that to you. Dylan said, in the zombie movies, you lose the brain and you stop moving. Say not Return of the Dead, Stanley said. Alright. Not Return of the Dead, Stanley said. Those zombies could talk like us, and nothing killed them, not even the brain. Brains, Stanley moaned, holding out his arms in front of him. A few of the younger boys laughed, but the sounds were hollow and dry. They're just movies, not real life, you dummies. Tyler said. They continued to argue the rules of zombies, both fictional and real, as some disturbance ahead caught Jeff's attention. He wasn't the only one either. Many other corpses in various stages of decay turned and picked up their pace as much as they could to head in that direction. The old woman. The old woman with the broken ankle hopped and shuffled past them and ahead. Her dress ripped a few inches up the side from her effort. This revealed dark spider webs of veins in her pale, wrinkled flesh. Jeff wondered if all that damage was from after she died or not. The naked man, still wearing his waxy makeup, hustled by on the side. Jeff sidestepped until he almost bumped Tyler, trying to give that creep a clear path. What are you doing, man? You stink too much to be getting that close to me. Jeff almost made a comment about how Tyler probably couldn't smell anything with a big butthole where his nose should be. But Jeff stilled his tongue. It wasn't just that it would be hurtful. It wasn't just that it would be hurtful. Tyler was hard to deal with. Even when you didn't antagonize him. Someone screamed from out of the mob of bodies gathering around a car wrecked half up onto the curb. That stopped all other conversation. Dylan asked what dummy would still be out here at night if they were still alive. Well, they won't be alive for long. Where do the ones that are killed and not buried go during the day? They won't be gone alive for long, Tyler said. Where do the ones that are killed and not buried go during the day? Stanley asked. They probably just crawl into bed like every other person, Dylan said. Stanley appeared to be considering it. You really think so? I don't know. I'm in the dirt under the backyard next to you every day, aren't I? All right. Glass shattered on the driver's side, and the screaming got louder. Vandalism. Vandalism, Jeff muttered. Yeah, someone called the cops. Tyler said, to laughter from the rest of the group. I think one of those guys biting her on the boob is a cop, Dylan said. The boys laughed again. Could be funny, Jeff supposed, but he guessed that most of the kids were just laughing at the word boob. Alright, they dragged her from the car and fell upon her in the street. Her screaming went on for a while. They tore at her clothes and then tore at her flesh. Blood ran out from under the bare feet of the dead and pooled in bright, thick puddles on the asphalt. I apologize if this is graphic for anybody. If you need to head out, I understand. Alright. Blood ran out from under the bare feet of the dead and pooled in bright, thick puddles on the asphalt. Why do they eat them? Dylan asked. Say, why do they eat them, do you think? I don't feel like eating anyone. I don't know. Maybe we're different. Some of them. Alright, Tom, where's the sing for 5 minutes option? I am more careful about that sort of thing than Armand is. Try to put things in there that won't disrupt or make me miserable. But Armand has to learn some things the hard way. And if he's on here, I'm sure he'll agree. I don't know, maybe we're different. Some of them can talk too, though. And they seem sort of normal when they aren't eating anyone. Maybe it's because we were killed, Jeff said. Maybe it's because we were killed, Jeff said. Everyone got quiet. Even the woman being slaughtered went silent, leaving only the sounds of chewing and slurping. What do you mean? Tyler finally asked. Jeff shrugged and felt the fissure in the skin along his back pull again. He had to remember to stop doing that, or soon he'd have nothing holding his insides together. A blackened body that was mostly skeleton pulled itself along the street toward the blood, toward the pooling blood, as if in warning of what Jeff's future might hold. All right. Other less desecrated, I know that's not the right word, but I'm going to use it anyway. Others less desecrated bodies knelt in the street and started lapping up the blood. Jeff said, being killed might make us different. Being killed might make us different. the way we were killed. Maybe. The fact that we were ghosts before all this stuff with rising bodies started might be part of it too. Tyler waved Jeff's thoughts off. Skin split over one of his fingers and white bone jutted free. Nonsense. They're not really eating her. They just kill her and she becomes one of us. I'm not like them, Stanley said. Aren't we, though? Tyler challenged. I'm not eating anyone. I'm not losing my mind like a flesh-eating zombie, Dylan said. We may not have eaten anyone, Tyler said. Where's the fix it in the rewrite? That's still something I have a hard time doing, letting something be bad and knowing I can change it later. Oh yeah. I've done that more recently than I have in the past. Some of it may be writing on stream, just the idea of getting the story down, and some of it may just be practicality. I've found that no matter how good my first draft is, that typically a lot of the things that make it better come in the first and second edit. And I started doing 2 edits instead of 1 for a lot of stories, and I think that's made a big difference. I think some of it's just getting rid of the fear, like that fear of getting the story wrong, that kind of slows you down. It can stop you. It can give you writer's block. That fear of getting it wrong can cause you to play it safe. So you're like, what's the right thing to do, quote unquote? And sometimes we mistake the right thing to do with a story with the safe thing to do. So we're like, okay, what would the most readers like, or what would a publisher like, or that kind of thing, which isn't out of the realm of discussion in terms of making a story good, because gatekeepers can be important to improving a story, but sometimes the unsafe choice is the one that makes the story right, and not always. It's not. I don't think every time you do the bloodiest or weirdest or most terrible thing in a story that's the right move, or that it makes the story great, but sometimes it does, and I think you're more likely to figure out when those times are if you're just willing to plow through. A lot of times for me it's just finding the right word, that idea of like, well, that's not really the word I want, but I can figure it out when I have time to sit down and think about it and not disrupt the story or that kind of thing. But yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for just getting the draft down. Worst case, you write it, it's terrible. You got it so bad that like even in the edits you don't feel real good about it. But nothing stops you from going back and rewriting that story in a new way. New characters, maybe same premise, different direction, that kind of thing. again, you don't want to dwell on a story forever, but I'm just saying, like, even if worst case the story turns out terrible, you can set it aside and revisit the idea in another form later, and you haven't really lost anything. But especially in a month like this, where I'm writing a story every day, so that some are a lot better than others, and probably a number of the ones in the second half of the month are going to be more surprisingly good to me than even the ones I'm writing now, just from the act of practicing and getting the cobwebs out and all the things that kind of get in the way of a story, and then I start getting more creative. Um, there's a lot to be said about just getting that draft down, like getting the bones of the story down without fear, and then going back in the edits, and a lot of times making small changes, but you can make huge changes in the edits too once you have a framework where you're like, okay, I'm not guessing where the story's going anymore. Now I'm just saying, okay, because of where this story ends, probably there needs to be more in this scene at the beginning, or maybe I hint at it more in the middle. And now that you kind of have the whole story, you're able to do some of that fine tuning, right down to, let me just pick the word that I think is correct without dwelling on it too much. I did that a lot. Those of you who know, with the zombie novel that I wrote during NaNoWriMo, when I was doing the editing on that, I did a lot of word switching. Because it was this like 50,000 word zombie action scene, there's certain words that I used over and over and over again. And in a lot of the editing, I was kind of going through and, putting in synonyms and figuring out, okay, do I go with a simple word here, or do I do a word that means roughly the same thing but is more obscure, to change it up and that kind of thing. So I made a lot of changes in that sense in terms of word choice with that particular story. And if I had focused too much on that during the first drafting, I think I would have just bogged down in it. And then you kind of get into this thesaurus mode, where you're just coming up with 27 different words for wet, and 100 different words for bloody, and 1,000 different words for running, that kind of thing. And then you start getting weird, where you're just kind of picking words where a reader would be like, I don't understand why I didn't just say run. I get that voice in my head during the first draft telling me that it sucks. Little by little, I'm getting better at shutting it down before it freezes me. Yeah, and sometimes it does. Like, I just, it's not that, like, suddenly you go fearless and everything's magic. But even Stephen King, like in On Writing, he talked about that some days writing feels like shoveling shit from a sitting position. And you just kind of have to get through that. Some people might have an issue with some of Stephen King's stories and feel like maybe he should have spent more time on them. But I think the point stands of just that idea that, like, some days you're just really hammering out the bones of a story, and then you're going to have to fix it on the back end. Now, again, the cost of writing a fearless first draft and not being afraid to get it wrong is that you got to put some work in on the edits. And I don't think that has to be like a constant, complete rewrite. Sometimes what makes a story suck is small, and you make those tiny changes, and suddenly what was bothering you kind of falls into place. Like the threads start to come through, the themes start to come through, and not every line has to be perfect. There are a few stories that I've written, and I don't necessarily mean that the stories are great, but I felt like each line was almost perfect. And a lot of times that's the shorter ones, where I was very particular about each line, sometimes because I had a really tight word count or something else, and I just felt like every line really punched and did what it was supposed to do. I think that's rare. I don't really always have a story like that. And a lot of times the stories that readers like are ones that, as I was writing them, I'm like, I don't know about this. And sometimes it's that first or second edit, sometimes by the end of a third edit, where I finally feel like, oh, there's something good here. I underestimated what I had here when I went through. Just as an example with this one, I feel kind of good about it. I don't know where it's going. I don't know that it's going to be a masterpiece, but I think it's just quirky enough and just weird enough. And I have an idea now of where I want it to go that's very different from what I thought when I started. That I think is going to be pretty solid. So I've had a couple stories here this month where I wasn't really enamored with them. And I felt a little better about a couple of them when I edited, but there's one or two that I don't think they're particularly stellar stories. I don't necessarily think they're terrible, but I don't think they hit as hard as some of the others that I've written. But the act of writing those stories, the ones that aren't perfect, propel you forward to that one where everything kind of falls into place, and the words are all perfect, the sentences all feel like they're purposeful, and the story really, you impress yourself with it, like you hook yourself with the story. But again, getting to those is a process of writing the ones that may not pan out the way that you expect. I don't think necessarily everybody needs to write a story every day for a month, but that's one thing I do to sort of find where the magic is. If I'll do another short story collection probably next year, and some of these stories that I'm writing this month will probably end up in there, and it's probably ones that I haven't written yet, because some of the stories I'm writing now are kind of getting me into the creative flow, and so in a sense they're sort of the seeds or the fertilizer that's going to make magic with the future stories. I think that's to a lesser degree that's true of novels and just general short story writing. If you're not marathoning a bunch of short stories, the fact that you write 4 or 5 or 6 of them over a period of time, you've put down the groundwork, so the 7th, 8th, and 9th story are going to be better than if those were the first or second stories that you were written, I guess. So, I mean, just like everything else, it's practice. But yeah, going back to what originally sparked this, I think there's a lot to be said about not being afraid to get it wrong, especially in the first draft, so that you don't dwell on minor things that obviously you can go back at your leisure during one of your editing sessions and just pick a different word, or cut an entire paragraph or a thread in the story that isn't really doing much, to kind of make the story leaner, or adding in some things that kind of flesh out what was good about it and that kind of thing. But that's stuff I typically save for the editing. And like with these stories, I'll edit once on screen and then edit off screen, where I kind of get more nitty gritty about trying to perfect a few things. All right, we may not have eaten anyone, Tyler said, but we sure did have our way with the butcher when he was still alive. Dylan and Stanley both spoke over one another at once. He deserved it. Of course he did. Tyler agreed. I'd do it again if we could find him. Of course he did, Tyler agreed. I'd do it again if we could find him. Maybe that woman had it coming too. Maybe not. It doesn't matter. We're all dead in the end, one way or the other. We didn't used to get up each night and keep walking around, though, Dylan said. Didn't we? I remember getting up all the time. since I died. Tyler said. None of the boys had a challenge for that. Say then Tyler stepped forward. I'm going to try some. Try some? Stanley asked. Going to eat her? Dylan shook his head. Tyler kept going. I'm going to try some of the blood, at least, just to see what all the fuss is about. The younger boys cowered away, but they kept watching, and they didn't leave. Are you seeing this? Dylan asked. He turned and then frowned. Where did Jeff go? Okay, I don't want that. All right. Jeff emerged from the basement of his house. He probably shouldn't have come. Now here's another thing that may need to be fixed. The way I'm changing this story, I think I'd written it in a way at the beginning that doesn't make sense here at the end, so I may have to switch it to make this ending work. Jeff emerged from the basement of his house. He probably shouldn't have come, but he missed them. Basement scared him ever since the butcher. This was where Jeff was taken. Right out of his yard and over the fence. He thought he'd never see his family again. He certainly didn't expect to see them like this. Sometimes he offered to get them things they needed, but Mom always told him. Now see, I may, if I'm implying that the family's down in the basement, to make this story work, I'm probably going to need to write that part where they're talking down in the basement, where they have some kind of interaction. But Mom always told him they could get what they needed during the day. There wasn't much left to find, though. I'm not going to write it now, but I may need to write a scene between Jeff and his mom down there in the basement. I need to think about it. That probably is what the story needs, so that may be something I add on tomorrow. Let's see. We'll just finish the story today and decide how strong it is on its own. There wasn't much left to find, though. Eventually, they would have to move on. But to where? This was apparently going on everywhere. Well, 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 Tyler said, as he led the other boys through a hole in the broken fence into Jeff's overgrown yard. What you doing, sport? What the hell did you do, Tyler? Look like you took a bath in someone's period. Alright, I apologize if that's too gross, but these are kids ribbing each other, so they talk about gross things, I think. Tyler wiped at the blood coating his chin and running down his chest. Tyler wiped at the blood, coating his chin and running down his chest. Sport, that's a fighting word. Yeah, it sounds like it, doesn't it? No one really says that when they're trying to compliment you, I don't think. Not anymore. Tyler wiped at the blood, coating his chin and running down his chest. He looked like a wild beast. Painted like that. She was bleeding for sure. Did you enjoy it? Are you a real zombie boy now? Don't change the subject. What are you doing here? What are you hiding? You gross me out, Tyler. Jeff told himself inside his head over and over again not to look back at the storm door leading to the basement. You gross me out, Tyler, Jeff told himself inside his head. Let me put that together. I didn't want to watch. It made me sad. So I came here to look at our old stuff. Tyler licked his red lips with his black tongue. Let me play with your old stuff. Go play with yourself, Tyler. Take a bath. You're a mess. I know, Tyler said. My mommy would be so mad if she hadn't forgotten me a long time ago. Maybe I can borrow your mom. If you can find her, Jeff said. I'd love to see her again. Maybe I should look in there. Tyler stepped around Jeff, and he fought the urge to stop him. Maybe you're hiding her in the basement. Well, if she was there, I'd ask her what she did with all my stuff. How long did she wait before they threw it all away and gave up on me? Tyler hesitated. Hell, don't go all mushy on me, Jeff. We're rotting away fast enough already. If it makes you feel better, they knocked my whole house down. If it makes you feel better, they knocked my whole house down and built one they thought was better. Jeff nodded. It does make me feel better. Bite me, Tyler said. No thanks. You look like you would taste. You look like you would taste like roadkill. The boys laughed. I bet your mother would taste good. I know that's gross. I apologize, everybody. Tyler said, and turned his eyes on, let's do milky, his milky eyes on Jeff's house. We ever find her, I'll tell you the flavor once I'm done. Jeff balled his fists and started to say, if you ever, Dylan, alright, hold on here. Alright, Tom says, maybe this has been brought up before, but writing a story in one live stream is similar to when Harlan Ellison used to type out a short story in an hour or two at a bookstore and post pages in the window. Armand says, I'm back from my nap. It was wonderful. What did I miss? A lot of blood and guts. And a pseudo-zombie story. I don't know if this is a true zombie story. I thought about that a while back, and a couple people had brought it up to me, not on stream, but off stream, talking about Harlan Ellison. I think he may have started that in the 70s, but he was definitely doing it in the 80s and 90s, where he would just go to a bookstore and sit down at a typewriter and type, and people would literally ask him questions. They would kind of interrupt him. They would look over his shoulder. And Harlan Ellison's point in his point in doing that was to kind of take the magic out of writing, or the mystique rather. And his point was that anybody could do it, and that editing was overrated, that you just write the story and put it up. I disagree with him that editing is overrated, but there's something to be said in all that one session. So yeah, this very much is like that to some level. I have to imagine that if Harlan Ellison were shifted forward in time to right now, that this would be what he was doing, along with that bookstore thing. I got Jay to tell a story after page 2, Your Honor. Thank you, Tom. Very good, very good. Hope your nap was good, Armand. I think you earned it. Not as much as probably your wife has earned it, but you're allowed to take a nap too. Ellison would be a Twitch fan. Probably he would be on Twitch. I don't know if he'd watch anyone else do it, but I think this would have been right up his alley. Now, if he were still alive and older, he probably would be over it and would just claim that people were stealing his idea or whatever, or wouldn't take any notice of it at all. All right, Jeff balled his fist. It's hard to say. If you ever, Dylan, cut him off. Oh my God. There he is. Look. A few of the younger boys actually drop to their knees. Many of them whimpered. This was still the monster that had been all their shared nightmare. Standing there at the edge of the fence. All right. And he would be kicked off Twitch very quickly. Yes. Yeah, he would. He was not very woke. That is for sure. He's got kicked off of a lot of things. Some of it was kind of deserving too, though. Standing there at the edge of the fence was the butcher. Alright. Hey Jay, followed you the other day. Yeah, I saw that, Joe. Thank you. I didn't get a chance to say that I really admire your goal of writing a short story a day. Oh, thank you very much. I was able to do it last year in May, and I'm doing it in March this year because I got some conventions in May. Yeah, I enjoy it. I've been writing here for a while now. Pretty much once you get started, that's kind of it. You know, the idea of just getting the stream going and getting to work. I think that's the hardest part, and then you just kind of trust yourself to tell the story or whatever. It gets challenging about halfway through the month, and then into the later days when you're coming up with new story titles and something new to write about, and revisiting old tropes, but then kind of trying to find a new way to do them. But I appreciate the support, man. Thank you so much. Standing there at the edge of the fence was the butcher. Of course, he was older. He looked feeble, as always, but being dead, like the rest of them, he was moving around lively. Holy crap, Stanley said. It's really him. Jeff had still kind of thought that he might be dreaming this. But then the butcher showed his discolored teeth, the gold tooth that Jeff had stolen himself was still missing. He could see the dark socket where it once lived. Why was he here? Alright. The details were sharp. Had to be the fear. It had been a long time since Jeff had been afraid. And the last time was with this monster of a man. There was no dirt on him. There were little pieces of deteriorated, that's not how you spell that, hold on. Deteriorated red fabric spotted over the dark suit, jacket, and pants. The butcher had no loved ones by the time he died, and as far as Jeff knew, there was no funeral. There was some sort of white paint up around the dead man's sunken eyes. But it didn't appear to be funeral home makeup. So where the hell had he been? The butcher growled at them from deep in his dead man's throat. Did you boys miss me? A few more took a step back. He laughed, and it was a horrid noise. You can't hurt me anymore, but I owe each of you little buggers a hurtin' for certain. Jeff stepped forward instead of back. If you think we can't hurt you, and you don't know much about how this works. Okay. The butcher's broken smile wavered. Then he said, I know far more about pain and death than you will ever learn. And I'm going to remind you of that, little boy. Tyler, covered in fresh blood, stepped up beside Jeff. Dylan and Stanley lined up on the other side. The butcher's smug grin faltered again. Jeff said, last time I saw you, you begged me to leave you alone. You begged for mercy. I remember you begging too. Not the last time you saw us, though, old man. You are in our world now. Jeff said. took another step. You made a huge mistake coming back here. But I'm so glad you did. The Butcher took a step backward, and that was all they needed. The boys rushed forward. Even the little ones joined the chase. The Butcher ran. He cried out. He might have had a chance to get away, but he twisted one of his knees and the leg nearly came off. The boys were determined. And unfortunately for the Butcher, there were still hours before dawn. All right.